Welcome back to Islands of Sanity, particularly as we navigate these very uncertain times. If you're a first-time listener, thank you for joining me. Several weeks ago, I began a series on coping with collapse, and today I want to return to the series by focusing on the topic of uncertainty and how to live with it. The novel coronavirus could not be named more appropriately because it is novel, and there's so much we don't know about it. Add to uncertainty about the virus and how it actually behaves, the reality that the response in the United States has been abysmal. Other countries like Sweden, the UK, and Brazil have also managed their responses improperly, intentionally or otherwise. But as a result, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of preventable deaths have resulted. In addition to the abysmal response, has been the economic and social devastation created by the virus, so that in the United States, we're not certain when public schools, colleges, and universities will open, nor do we know when daycare facilities, churches, restaurants, gyms, and a host of other services and businesses will reopen, or even if they will reopen in some states. We may be facing another wave of the pandemic in the fall, or even before, if the current explosion of COVID cases increases. I recall that in the early days of lockdown, I felt stunned, but not surprised, by the speed with which the pandemic spread. Even after researching and writing about collapse for 13 years, I was taken aback that full-on collapse was finally here. No longer was it something I was writing about, something mostly in the future. No, it was actually here. Like most Western minds, mine kept trying to look into the future and imagine what was going to happen next. But I soon realized that in all of my articles and talks about collapse as a spiritual practice, I had emphasized, among other things, that perhaps more than anything else, we needed to be prepared to live with uncertainty. And so every time I found myself projecting into the future, I would bring myself back to the present moment. In those early days of lockdown, I read a daily meditation from one of my great teachers, Richard Rohr, who sent out a missive on liminal space. And what is liminal space? Here's what Richard Rohr says about it, and I have found this summary to be spot on. Quote, liminal space is an inner state and sometimes an outer situation where we can begin to think and act in new ways. It is where we are betwixt and between, having left one room or stage of life, but not yet entered the next. We usually enter liminal space when our former way of being is challenged or changed. Perhaps when we lose a job or a loved one, during illness, at the birth of a child, or a major relocation. It is a graced time, but often does not feel graced in any way. In such space, we're not certain or in control. This global pandemic we now face is an example of an immense collective liminal space. The very vulnerability and openness of liminal space allows room for something genuinely new to happen. We are empty and receptive, erased tablets waiting for new words. Liminal space is where we are most teachable, often because we are most humbled. Liminality keeps us in an ongoing state of shadowboxing instead of ego confirmation, struggling with the hidden side of life and calling so-called normalcy into creative question. It is no surprise then that we generally avoid liminal space. Much of the work of authentic spirituality and human development is to get people into liminal space and to keep them there long enough that they can learn something essential and new. Many spiritual giants like St. Francis, Julian of Norwich, Dorothy Day, and Mohandas Gandhi tried to live their entire lives in permanent liminality, on the edge or periphery of the dominant culture. This in-between place is free of illusions and false payoffs. It invites us to discover and live from broader perspectives and with much deeper seeing. In liminal space, we sometimes need to not do and not perform according to our usual successful patterns. We actually need to fail abruptly and deliberately falter to understand other dimensions of life. We need to be silent instead of speaking, experience emptiness instead of fullness, anonymity instead of persona, and pennilessness instead of plenty. In liminal space, we descend and intentionally do not come back, up or out immediately. It takes time, but this experience can help us re-enter the world with freedom and new creative approaches to life. I imagine that even if you've never heard the word liminal before, you likely have a sense of what I'm talking about. It would be difficult to exist in this time of global crisis and not feel caught between at least two worlds, the one we knew and the one to come. Our consciousness and that of future generations has been changed. We cannot put the genie back into the bottle, unquote. Those are the words of radical Franciscan priest Richard Rohr. So here we are, folks, in major liminal space. Let's recap what Rohr is saying. First, he says that liminal space compels us to be open and vulnerable and teachable. It keeps us in a constant state of uncertainty, which is a blow to the ego or false self, but is the territory where the sacred self, the authentic self at our core, can be deepened, and we can re-enter the world with fresh eyes, more creativity, and a more open heart. It is crucial, and I mean crucial, that we open ourselves humbly to liminal space. Openness to it is the cornerstone of resilience. And let's remember that resilience is not about bouncing back. There is no bouncing back, even though millions of people in America at this moment are mingling on beaches and in crowded parks and shopping malls, taking no precautions with the virus and acting as if the pandemic never happened. Resilience is, in fact, about learning and growing from whatever predicament we find ourselves in. And that is exactly what liminal space is about. If the virus had a message for us, I believe it would be this. It might say something like, I am here at this time to wake you up. You have been pillaging and plundering the earth and all living beings because you're living the story of separation. You're disconnected from yourself, from each other, and from the earth. By way of my illness, I'm showing you a new way of compassion and caring for one another. I'm forcing you to slow down and decrease your destruction of the planet you inhabit. I'm separating you from your addiction to busyness in order to avoid and anesthetize your feelings, and forcing you to look within yourself, to feel grief, fear, anger, and despair. I'm destroying your lifelong delusion of separation. In your quarantine isolation, I am compelling you to feel how much you need to connect at a much deeper level with yourself, with other humans, and with nature. I am begging you to stop living in the future and to focus on the present moment. So how do we make the most of liminal space? How do we learn the lessons of coronavirus? I want to suggest 5 ways. First, I believe that this is a time for absolute commitment to living in the present moment. Certainly, we need to plan as best we can with the limitations the virus has imposed on us to try to plan for the future. We'd all like to know what we'll be doing in the fall. Teachers would like to know if they'll be teaching. Students would like to know if they'll be in the classroom. Dentists would like to know if they'll be having patients. Parents are concerned about how they're going to care for their children. We can plan as well as humanly possible for the future, but meanwhile, it's time to practice being in the moment. Spending time in nature can help us. We need not go camping or even take long walks in the forest or a park. We can sit or lie on the ground and feel the grass. Lying face down on the earth is one of the most grounding experiences available to us, and it doesn't cost anything. Watch ants travel through the grass or up and down the trunk of a tree. Drink in the sound of birds. Sit quietly with your back against a tree and breathe deeply, feeling your own heartbeat. Secondly, when you feel yourself becoming preoccupied with the future, bring yourself back to the present moment. Fully engage in whatever you're doing. If you're on the computer, stop and breathe. If you're driving, pay full attention to your driving. If you're in bed, bring yourself back to your body and breathe. Thirdly, gratitude is a fabulous practice for becoming present. No matter how small or insignificant the blessings of your life may seem, count them. Give thanks even for eyes with which to see, ears with which to hear, a nose with which to smell, a mouth with which to talk and taste. And if you're disabled in any of these ways, give thanks for the senses and abilities you have. Fourth, find ways to serve or give time and attention to people who are not doing as well as you are. Most of us do not have to think too long or hard to find ways to help or provide some form of care to other living beings. And fifth, remain curious about the lessons the pandemic wants to teach you. Speak to it as you would to a friend. That may sound strange, but coronavirus is a living organism. It is here to teach all of us in this liminal space of not knowing. Ask your deeper self, or the universe, or the virus itself, what are you here to teach me? What do I need to learn? I'm listening. Finally, I'd like to read and comment on two amazing poems about uncertainty. One is by Buddhist poet Jane Hirshfield. It's called Against Certainty. There is something out in the dark that wants to correct us. Each time I think this, it answers that. Answers hard, in the heart grammar's strictness. If I then say that, it too is taken away. Between certainty and the real, an ancient enmity. When the cat waits in the path hedge, no cell of her body is not waiting. This is how she is able so completely to disappear. I would like to enter the silence portion as she does. To live amid the great vanishing as a cat must live, one shadow fully at ease inside another. And the other poem, or a portion of a poem, is by T.S. Eliot, and it's called Wait Without Hope. I said to my soul, be still and wait without hope. For hope would be hope for the wrong thing. Wait without love, for love would be love of the wrong thing. There is yet faith, but the faith and the love and the hope are all in the waiting. Wait without thought, for you are not ready for thought. So the darkness shall be the light and the stillness, the dancing. Let's allow this time of uncertainty, this time of liminal space, this time of great vanishing, to teach and transform us. As always, I leave you with my two favorite questions. In collapse, who do you want to be? And what did you come here to do? Until next time, this is Carolyn Baker, asking you to create islands of sanity in the many seas of chaos we are sailing.